All right, so I want to start today with a bit of a confession, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I look at the stack of research we have for a deep dive like this one, and it is a heavy stack, my first instinct is always to, look for the celebrities of biology.
The glamorous molecules.
Exactly. The rock stars. We always talk about DNA, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the master blueprint, or we talk about proteins because they're the muscles and the enzymes, the things doing all the heavy lifting.
Workhorses.
The workhorses. And then there's this other category. A category that, if I'm being completely honest, I usually just associate with guilt.
I think I know where you're going with this.
I think about it when I'm stepping on a bathroom scale, or, when I'm trying to scrub a greasy pan after cooking bacon. We just call it fat.
Right.
Yeah.
And in the popular imagination, fat is almost always the villain. It's the thing you want to lose. It's this stubborn, inert baggage that just ruins your day.
But after spending the last week just buried in our source material, specifically the chapter on lipids in Leninger's Principles of Biochemistry and the one on physiologically significant lipids in Harper's Illustrated Biochemistry, I realized we have got this completely fundamentally wrong. Calling lipids fat it's like calling a skyscraper concrete. It misses the entire architectural point.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect. Because if you could magically strip every single lipid out of your body right now, you wouldn't just lose weight. You would literally cease to exist instantaneously.
Yeah.
Your cells would lose their borders and just dissolve into a biological soup.
Wow.
Your nervous system would short circuit because all the electrical insulation would vanish, and your energy reserves, the battery pack that keeps you alive between meals, would just be gone.
See, that is the hook for me. That's what this deep dive is all about. We're going to stop looking at fat as just a dietary issue and start looking at it as an engineering marvel.
A design principle of life itself.
Exactly. So this is our deep dive into Biochemistry 10, lipids. And our mission here is to synthesize the deep chemical rules from Leninger with the clinical life or death reality that you see in Harper.
And we should say right up front, for everyone listening,
Yeah.
this isn't a substitute for reading the text. These books are the absolute Bibles of the field.
Oh, for sure.
What we're doing here is building a conceptual map. We want to give you those aha moments so that when you go back and read the chapters yourself, all the details have a place to stick.
We're the tour guides. The books are the territory. You still have to walk the ground.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's start at ground zero, the definition. This was the first place where Leninger just threw me a complete curveball. If I ask you what a protein is, you can give me a very neat chemical answer.
A chain of amino acids. Simple.
Right. If I ask about DNA, it's a chain of nucleotides. But lipids, they're the rebels. They just don't play by those rules.
They really don't. It's fascinating. Lipids are unique because they aren't defined by a specific, repeating chemical monomer. There's no single lipid brick in that sense.
So how on earth do you group them together then?
They're defined by a physical property. To be a member of the lipid club, you don't need a specific shape per se. You just need to satisfy one very important condition. You must be insoluble in water.
It's the solubility definition.
That's it. It's all about hydrophobicity, the fear of water. If you throw a biological molecule into a water-based environment, which, let's be honest, is what your body is,
90-something% water, yeah.
and that molecule refuses to mix if it clumps together or floats on top, well, biologically speaking, that's a lipid.
And we tend to think of that as a nuisance, like oil separating from vinegar in a salad dressing. It's annoying. But you're saying this refusal to mix is actually a functional superpower.
It is the fundamental superpower of life. I mean, think about the primordial soup. Life evolved in water. If you want to create a distinct self, if you want to separate inside from outside, you need a material that refuses to dissolve in the environment.
You need a barrier.
You need a barrier. You need a wall. And that is the evolutionary role of the lipid. It's the wall that allows life to exist, distinct from the ocean it's swimming in.
So hydrophobicity isn't a bug, it's the core feature.
The absolute core feature.
All right, so to understand how they build these walls and, do everything else, we have to look at the basic unit, the brick. Leninger spends a lot of time on this, the fatty acid.
The Lego brick of the lipid world. It's the closest thing we have to a fundamental unit.
Right. And structurally, it looks deceptively simple. You've got a head and you've got a tail.
Correct. Imagine a long snake. The head of that snake is a carboxylic acid group. Now, chemically, that head is polar. It actually likes water. It's hydrophilic.
Okay, so the head wants to mix with water.
It does. But the body of the snake, the tail, that's a long hydrocarbon chain. It's just carbon and hydrogen over and over and over again. And that tail is completely nonpolar. Wants nothing to do with water.
It's the hydrophobic part.
Exactly, the water-fearing part.
And the length of that tail can vary, right?
It does. In nature, they usually range from as few as 4 to as many as 36 carbons. But the real magic, and I mean the physics that dictates everything from the texture of your butter to the health of your heart, lies in the saturation of that tail.
Okay, this is a word I see on food packaging every single day. Saturated fat versus unsaturated fat. But Leninger explains this not as a nutritional concept, but as a problem of spatial packing. It's almost like a game of Tetris.
It is entirely a packing problem. That's the best way to think about it. Let's just visualize it. A saturated fatty acid means that the carbon chain is fully saturated with hydrogen atoms. Every carbon is holding on to as many hydrogens as it possibly can.
So there are no double bonds between the carbons.
Not a single one. And the key thing is what this means for the shape.
And what does that look like in 3D space?
It looks like a straight line. A rigid but flexible rod. I want you to imagine a brand new, unsharpened pencil. Perfectly straight.
Okay, I've got a straight pencil in my mind.
Now, imagine you have 1,000 of those pencils. You can pack them into a box incredibly tightly, right? They line up perfectly against each other, surface to surface.
Yeah, no wasted space.
Exactly. And in chemistry, when these nonpolar molecules pack that tightly together, they form what are called van der Waals interactions. They get sticky. They stick to each other.
And the result of that tight packing, that stickiness, what we can see with the naked eye is...
A solid.
Yeah.
That is why butter is hard at room temperature. It's why coconut oil is solid. It's why beef fat or suet is hard. The molecules are straight, so they stack perfectly and lock together into a waxy solid crystal.
That makes perfect sense. Saturated equals straight equals solid. So now let's contrast that with unsaturated.
Okay, so unsaturated means there's at least one double bond between two of the carbons in that chain. You've had to remove some hydrogens to create that stronger bond. But here's where nature does something very, very specific. Almost exclusively, nature puts that double bond in what we call the cis configuration.
And this is where the geometry gets wild. A cis double bond isn't just a chemical change. It's a major structural kink.
Exactly. A huge one. It puts a rigid 120-degree bend in the chain. So now, go back to your box of pencils. But I want you to take all those pencils and snap them halfway down so they're all bent at a sharp angle. Now try to pack them neatly into that same box.
You can't. It's impossible. They'll be all jumbled up. There will be big air gaps between them. They can't lie flat against each other.
And because they can't pack tightly, they can't form those strong, attractive van der Waals forces. They remain loose. They flow past each other.
And that's oil.
That is why olive oil is liquid. That is why vegetable oil pours from a bottle. The kink prevents solidification.
This has to be crucial for biology, right? Because our bodies aren't made of butter. We need to be flexible. We need to be fluid.
We need to be fluid, absolutely.
Right.
If your cell membranes were made entirely of saturated fats, you would be a stiff, brittle statue. You'd shatter. We need those kinks to create space, to allow for motion, to let things pass in and out of the cell. Fluidity is life.
Okay, speaking of geometry and kinks, we have to address the arch villain of the modern diet, the trans fat. Because this feels like a classic case of humans trying to outsmart biochemistry, and in the process, creating a monster.
It really is. It's a tragic story of industrial chemistry, a real cautionary tale. So we just established that nature pretty much exclusively uses cis bonds, the kinked shape.
Right, the healthy natural bend.
But back in the mid-20th century, the food industry had a big problem. Vegetable oils were cheap and plentiful, but they were liquid. And you can't spread liquid oil on toast. They wanted the creamy, stable texture of butter, but at the low price of oil.
So they tried to, what, force hydrogen back into the oil to straighten it out?
That's exactly it. The process is called partial hydrogenation. They blasted the oil with hydrogen gas at high temperatures to try and saturate some of those double bonds. But the process had a nasty side effect. It didn't always break the double bond. Sometimes it chemically flipped it. From the cis configuration, the kink, to the trans configuration.
And what does a trans double bond look like structurally?
And that's the whole problem. A trans double bond straightens the chain right back out again.
Wait a minute, so hold on. Chemically, it's still unsaturated, it still has the double bond.
Yeah.
But physically, it acts like a saturated fat.
You've got it. It's an imposter. It's a molecular mimic. It has the straight, rigid shape of a saturated fat. So it packs tightly. It makes a perfect solid margarine that's cheap to produce. But, and this is the huge so what from Harper, your body's enzymes, the molecular machinery that processes lipids, have evolved for millions of years to recognize only two shapes, the straight saturated and the kinked cis.
They don't have a slot for the straight unsaturated.
Correct. The machinery jams. It doesn't know what to do with this foreign shape. Trans fats get incorporated into your cell membranes, but because they don't have that natural give, that kink, they alter the membrane properties in ways the body simply cannot regulate.
And the consequences are what?
Harper links this explicitly to systemic inflammation, to cardiovascular disease, to endothelial dysfunction. Basically, it gums up the works at a fundamental physical level.
That's profound. To think that a simple geometric rotation, just flipping the angle of a single bond, is the difference between a healthy nutrient and a metabolic poison.
It is. It's all about shape. And that's why the WHO and so many countries have moved to eliminate them. It's not about the calories, it's about the architecture.
Let's stick with the diet connection for a moment, because we can't talk about fatty acids without bringing up the omegas, omega-3, omega-6. I feel like people buy the supplements, but if you press them, they couldn't actually tell you what the 3 stands for.
It's a bit of a nomenclature quirk. Usually, biochemists number carbon atoms, starting from the head, the carboxylic acid end. We call that the alpha carbon. But for nutritional purposes, they started counting from the tail, the methyl end. The tail is the omega end, the last letter of the Greek alphabet.
So an omega-3 fatty acid just means it has a double bond, 3 carbons in from the tail end.
That's it. That's the entire code. An omega-6 has its first double bond, 6 carbons in from the tail.
But the biology behind this is fascinating because of our own limitations as humans.
It is. We lack the specific enzymes, the desaturoses, to create double bonds near the tail end of the molecule. We just can't do it. We can synthesize double bonds at carbon 9, counting from the head, but we can't place them any further down the chain.
Which means if our body needs a fatty acid with a double bond at position 3 or 6 relative to the omega end, we are totally dependent on our food supply. We have to eat them.
Exactly. That's the very definition of an essential fatty acid. We have to get them from our diet. Specifically, we need alpha-linolenic acid, which is an omega-3, and linoleic acid, which is an omega-6.
And Harper highlights a really critical distinction here. And it's not just about having them, it's about the balance between them. This is all about inflammation.
Right. This is so important. The omega-3s generally serve as precursors to anti-inflammatory signaling molecules. They help calm the immune system down, resolve inflammation. Think of them as the cool-down signal.
Okay.
Omega-6s, on the other hand, while absolutely necessary for things like skin integrity and other functions, can be precursors to pro-inflammatory signals. They're the sound the alarm signal.
And the problem is that the modern Western diet is just massively skewed toward the 6s.
Massively. We eat a lot of seed oils, corn oil, soybean oil, and processed foods that are loaded with them. The historical ratio is maybe 2-to-1 or even 1-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3. Now it's closer to 20-to-1.
And that creates what Harper calls a pro-inflammatory state.
It does. It's like having a fire alarm that is way too sensitive. It's constantly going off. And this kind of low-grade chronic inflammation is now thought to be a major driver for so many chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, you name it.
And it all comes down to the shape of that tail and exactly where that first kink is located.
It's all about the starting material for these signals.
Incredible. Okay, so let's do a quick checking here before we move on to the next section. We've established that lipids are defined by solubility, their refusal to mix with water.
Check.
We've established that the basic building block is the fatty acid, and its shape, whether it's straight or kinked, determines if it's solid fat or a liquid oil.
And that shape, that geometry, determines its biological function and health impact.
Perfect. Now let's talk about how the body uses these prompts to build things. I want to move on to section 2, the vault, the storage system. When we look in the mirror and see fat, what are we actually looking at chemically?
You are looking at triacylglycerols. You'll also see them called triglycerides, which is the more common clinical term.
And the structure is actually kind of elegant. You have a glycerol backbone, which Leninger basically describes as a kind of coat rack, and you hang 3 fatty acid coats on it.
That's a great visual. And this structure is critical for one very specific reason: neutrality. Remember how we said a free fatty acid had that polar acidic head?
Yeah, the part that likes water, it has a charge.
It does, but when you snap it onto that glycerol coat rack, you form an ester bond. You bind that head. You neutralize the charge.
So the entire molecule becomes nonpolar. The whole thing is now hydrophobic.
Completely hydrophobic, pure grease. And this property is what allows it to form those dense anhydrous droplets inside our specialized fat cells, the adipocytes. It just beads up. like oil and water.
Okay, but here's the big question. Why this molecule? The body has other ways to store energy. We have glycogen, which is basically stored sugar in our liver and muscles. Why did evolution decide that fat was the superior long-term battery for a human being?
It comes down to two major factors that are just huge evolutionary advantages: electricity and water. Or, to be more technical, the oxidation state and hydration.
Okay, break that down for me. Let's start with the electricity, the oxidation state.
Okay, so think of your food as fuel. To get energy from it, your body essentially burns it through oxidation. We strip electrons off the fuel and pass them down a chain to oxygen.
Right.
Fatty acids are what chemists call highly reduced. That's a fancy way of saying they are packed to the brim with high-energy electrons. They're essentially long chains of carbon and hydrogen, very similar in composition to gasoline or fossil fuels.
Whereas sugar carbohydrates, they already have a bunch of oxygen atoms in their structure.
Exactly. Sugar is already partially oxidized. It's like trying to burn wood that's already a bit damp or slightly charred. It has less potential energy left to give up. So gram for gram, fat holds more than twice the energy of sugar. It's just a much denser fuel.
Okay, that's a huge efficiency gain. But the water factor, this was the real aha moment for me in Leninger. It's all about the weight of the backpack you have to carry.
Right. This is maybe even more important for a mobile organism. Sugar is hygroscopic. It attracts and holds onto water. If you store glycogen in your liver or muscles, it binds about 2 grams of water for every single gram of glycogen. It's wet storage.
It's heavy.
Very heavy. Fat, on the other hand, is anhydrous. It's dry storage. It repels water.
So if you wanted to carry, say, 100,000 calories of energy reserves, which is a decent survival buffer for a human, and you tried to do that with sugar,
you would have to carry an immense amount of associated water weight. Leninger does the calculation, and it's staggering. If a typical human tried to carry their energy reserves as glycogen instead of fat, they would weigh an extra 100 pounds, maybe more.
we'd be these huge waterlogged blobs. We'd be waddling
We
around.
wouldn't be able to hunt, run away from predators, or migrate long distances. Fat is the perfect high-density, lightweight battery for a mobile creature.
That completely reframes the idea of a spare tire. It's not just excess. It's an incredibly efficient piece of evolutionary engineering.
It is. But Harper is quick to point out that this layer of fat isn't just a fuel tank. It serves other crucial physical roles. For instance, it's a wetsuit.
Thermal insulation.
Exactly. Whales, seals, penguins, they rely on a thick layer of triacylglycerols, blubber, to survive in freezing oceans. Hibernating animals depend on it. But for us, there's another type of insulation that is arguably even more critical: electrical insulation.
You're talking about the myelin sheath around our nerves.
Yes. Our nerves act like biological wires. For a signal to travel from your brain all the way down to your toe, it needs to move incredibly fast and without losing strength.
And if the wire were bare, the signal would just leak out and dissipate.
It would. So specialized cells wrap these long nerve axons in layers and layers of membrane, which is rich in nonpolar lipids. It's like the rubber coating on a copper wire. And because lipids don't conduct electricity, they force the electrical signal to jump rapidly from one gap in the insulation to the next, a process called saltatory conduction. It makes the signal transmission thousands of times faster.
And diseases like multiple sclerosis, that's a disease where this lipid insulation is attacked by the body's own immune system.
Precisely. The insulation is stripped away, and the nerve signals slow down or stop altogether, leading to the devastating neurological symptoms. It's a disease of lipid architecture.
So we have lipids as a high-density fuel, and lipids as thermal and electrical insulation. Now we get to the part that I found structurally the most complex, but also the most essential for life itself. Section 3, the architects, the lipids that actually build the walls of the cell.
The membrane lipids, and this is what I call the great divide in the lipid world. The triacylglycerols, the storage fats we just talked about, are just nonpolar blobs. They're pure grease. Yeah. But if you want to build a membrane, a wall that separates the watery inside of a cell from the watery outside, you can't just use a blob. You need a structure that can interact with water on its surfaces, but repel water in its core.
You need that split personality, the amphipathic design.
Amphit, meaning both. These molecules have a hydrophilic head that absolutely loves water and a hydrophobic tail that absolutely hates it.
And this is where the magic of self-assembly comes in. You don't need a tiny construction crew to build a cell membrane. If you just throw these amphipathic lipids into water, what do? They
spontaneously arrange themselves. It's just a matter of thermodynamics. It's the lowest energy state. The hydrophobic tails desperately want to hide from the water, so they point inward, towards each other.
And the hydrophilic heads are perfectly happy to face outward, interacting with the water on the inside and the outside of the cell.
And what you get automatically is a bilayer, a beautiful lipid sandwich where the bread is the polar heads and the filling is the oily tails. This happens automatically, and it is the fundamental architecture of every single cell on Earth.
The main players here, the primary architects, are the phospholipids. The structure is a bit more complex. You've got a glycerol backbone, two fatty acid tails, a phosphate group, and then a specialized head group attached to the phosphate.
Yes, and those head groups, things like choline, ethanolamine, serine, give the phospholipid its specific identity and function.
Right. And Harper gives this incredible clinical example of why the specific type of phospholipid matters so much. It is literally a matter of life and death for premature babies.
The lung surfactant story. This is one of the clearest and most powerful examples of lipid physics in all of medicine.
So set the scene for us. Why do our lungs, of all places, need to be coated in grease?
Okay, so I want you to imagine the millions of tiny microscopic air sacs in your lungs, the alveoli. They are lined with a thin layer of moisture.
Okay.
Now, water has incredibly high surface tension. The water molecules want to stick to each other very strongly. In a tiny curved sphere like an alveolus, that surface tension creates a massive inward pulling force that is trying to collapse the sphere.
So the wet balloon basically wants to snap shut on itself.
Exactly. If that surface tension is too high, every time you exhale, your lungs would collapse. And you'd have to fight incredibly hard with every single breath just to reinflate them. It would be physically exhausting, if not impossible.
Enter dipalmitoyl-lysine.
A very specific phospholipid. The cells lining the lungs secrete this lipid mixture, which we call surfactant. It coats the wet surface of the alveoli. And because it's a lipid, because it's amphipathic, it gets in between the water molecules and breaks up their tight bonding.
It breaks the surface tension.
It dramatically reduces the surface tension and therefore reduces the force that's trying to collapse the lung. It makes breathing easy and effortless.
And in premature infants.
Their cellular machinery to produce this specific lipid hasn't fully turned on yet. It usually kicks in very late in pregnancy. So they're born with a surfactant deficiency. The condition is called infant respiratory distress syndrome.
And their tiny lungs just collapse with every breath.
They do. They have to struggle for every single breath, and they can quickly exhaust themselves and die.
But the treatment is so elegantly simple.
We give them surfactant. We literally spray a preparation of these lipids into their lungs, and suddenly the physics of the system changes. The tension drops. They can breathe. It's one of the great success stories of modern neonatology, and it's all based on understanding lipid biophysics.
That's amazing. Now, phospholipids aren't just for structure. Some of them are also major players in cell signaling. Leninger talks about phosphatidylinositol.
Yes. The PIP2 pathway. These are phospholipids that are present in the membrane in very small quantities, but they have a massive impact.
A case of a minor component with a major role.
Exactly. They act as a trigger. When a hormone binds to a receptor on the outside of the cell, an enzyme is activated that cleaves the head group off of this specific lipid. That cleaved piece then travels inside the cell and acts as a second messenger, triggering a whole cascade of internal responses.
So the lipid in the membrane is like a preloaded signal just waiting for the command from the outside world.
Precisely. It's a way to translate an external signal into an internal action.
There's one more phospholipid that Harper mentions that I had never even heard of, but it seems absolutely critical for energy production. Cardiolipin.
Ah, the double phospholipid, the beast of a molecule. It's effectively two phospholipids glued together by a glycerol molecule, so it has 4 fatty acid tails.
And it's found pretty much only in one place in the cell.
Yes, in the inner mitochondrial membrane. The mitochondria, as you know, are the power plants of the cell. They have this incredibly complex double membrane system where all the machinery for generating ATP is located.
Right.
Cardiolipin acts as a special kind of molecular seal or glue. It helps organize the protein supercomplexes of the electron transport chain, ensuring they are held together tightly so electrons don't leak out. It's like the heavy-duty, non-slip flooring in the factory.
And Harper notes that if your cardiolipin starts to fail, if it gets oxidized or damaged with age, it's directly linked to things like heart failure and the aging process itself.
The seal on the engine breaks. The efficiency of the power plant plummets. Electrons leak, creating damaging free radicals. It all connects back to that idea of the silent architect. We might treat heart failure with drugs that target enzymes, but the root cause might be the crumbling of the lipid floor that those enzymes are standing on.
Wow. Okay, so before we leave the membrane, we have to talk about how it establishes identity. Because lipids aren't just walls, They are also signs. They're billboards. This brings us to section 4, sphingolipids and glycolipids.
Right. So far, we've been talking almost exclusively about lipids built on a glycerol backbone. Now we switch to a different backbone molecule called sphingosine. It's a more complex, nitrogen-containing amino alcohol.
And the really interesting part is when you attach a sugar molecule to it, then you get a glycolipid.
Yes. So I want you to picture the cell membrane again. You have that fluid sea of phospholipids. But sticking out of the head side, facing the outside world, you have these elaborate branching sugar chains that are attached to these sphingolipids. This whole sugary forest is called the glycocalyx.
It's like a forest of sugar trees growing out of the lipid soil.
That's a beautiful image. And those sugar trees act as ID cards. They are molecular identifiers that tell the rest of the body who they are. For example, your blood type, whether you are type A, type B, or type O, is strictly determined by the specific pattern of sugars attached to lipids on the surface of your red blood cells.
So when I say I'm type A, I am literally describing a specific glycolipid structure on my cell surface.
You are. It's all about molecular recognition. It's how your immune system knows self from non-self. It's how cells know to form tissues. Hi, I'm a liver cell. Hi, I'm a neuron. But this system has a dark side. It can be hijacked.
And this is the cholera story from Harper.
Yes, cholera is a devastating diarrheal disease. But the bacteria itself doesn't just smash its way into your cells. It's much more subtle. It produces a toxin. And that toxin needs a key to get inside your intestinal cells.
And the keyhole is a lipid.
A very specific type of glycolipid called a ganglioside, specifically one called GM1. It's a complex lipid with a very particular sugar shape, and it sits there on the surface of your intestinal cells. The cholera toxin has a protein domain with a shape that perfectly complements GM1. It docks onto it like a spaceship docking at the space station.
So it's like a burglar using your own fingerprint to open the smart lock on your front door.
Precisely. The toxin exploits your own identity molecule as a landing pad to then inject its poison into the cell. Once it docks, it triggers a cascade that causes your intestines to pump out massive amounts of water and electrolytes. It's a stark reminder that these lipids aren't just passive structural elements, they are the interface with the outside world, and sometimes the world exploits that interface.
Let's shift gears pretty dramatically now to section 5. We've been talking about these floppy chains and tails. Now we need to talk about rings. The rigid signal. Steroids.
This is a radical departure in structure. No more long fatty acid tails. Steroids are built on a core structure called the steroid nucleus. 4 fused carbon rings. It's a very flat, very rigid, planar molecule.
And the grandfather, the parent molecule of this entire family, is probably the most controversial molecule in modern medical history. Cholesterol.
Ah, cholesterol, the great villain of the 20th century. But both Lininger and Harper paint a very, very different picture. Cholesterol isn't a poison, it's a modulator. It is absolutely essential for all animal life. We can't live without it.
So explain its role in the membrane. We talked about how the membrane is this fluid sea of phospholipids. What is a big, rigid plate of cholesterol doing in there?
It acts as a fluidity buffer. It wedges itself in between the phospholipid tails.
Yeah.
Because it's so rigid and planar, it restricts the random motion of those floppy fatty acid tails.
So it stiffens the membrane, makes it less fluid.
It stabilizes it. Think about temperature. If the temperature goes up, the tails want to move faster, and the membrane could essentially melt or become too leaky. Cholesterol holds them together and prevents that. But, and this is the really cool part, if the temperature drops, the fatty acid tails want to pack tightly together and freeze solid.
And the cholesterol molecule gets in the way.
It gets in the way of that packing, preventing the membrane from crystallizing and becoming brittle. It acts like antifreeze.
So it maintains the Goldilocks zone, not too solid, not too liquid, just right.
Exactly. It ensures our cells can function across a range of different temperatures.
But it's not just a structural wedge, it's a precursor. This part just blew my mind. Cholesterol is the raw material for basically everything that defines our physiology and even our identity in terms of hormones.
It is the parent molecule. The body's chemists take that 4-ring cholesterol structure and they just snip a side chain here, add an oxygen atom there, and they can create testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, the master stress hormone, aldosterone, which regulates your blood pressure and salt balance.
And vitamin D.
Yes, via a precursor in the skin. When UV light from the sun hits a cholesterol derivative in your skin, it has enough energy to literally pop one of those 4 rings open, creating the active form of vitamin D.
So our bone health, Our sexual identity, our stress response, even our digestion through bile acids, it all starts with cholesterol.
Every single one of those pathways begins with that four-ring structure.
It really makes you rethink the aggressive public health drive to lower cholesterol at all costs. Obviously, pathologically high levels are linked to heart disease, but Harper reminds us that if you go too low, you are fundamentally tampering with the supply chain of your body's major signaling hormones.
It's all about balance, homeostasis.
Yeah.
You need enough for the chemistry to happen, but not so much that it starts precipitating out in your arteries.
Okay, moving on to our sixth section, the local internet of the body. We know about hormones like adrenaline that travel through the bloodstream and act everywhere. They're like a national broadcast. But there's a whole system of lipid signals that only whisper to the neighbors, the eicosanoids.
Icosa means 20. These are all derived from a 20-carbon polyunsaturated fatty acid, most commonly arachidonic acid.
Which is an omega-6 fatty acid, and it's just sitting there in the membrane, right? It's not floating around free.
That's right. It's like a sleeper agent. It's esterified into a membrane phospholipid, just sitting there waiting. When there is trauma or an infection or some other stimulus, an enzyme called phospholipase A2 comes along and cuts it loose from the membrane.
It's unleashed.
It's unleashed into the cell, where it immediately gets converted into these potent but very short-lived, short-range signals. They act locally, right where they're made. They're paracrine hormones.
And the classes of these signals are things we deal with every time we get a headache or a cut.
The prostaglandins.
Prostaglandins, yes. They are key regulators of pain, fever, and inflammation. When you have a throbbing headache or a red, swollen, painful ankle after you sprain it, that is your local cells pumping out prostaglandins saying, something is wrong here, pay attention, send help.
Okay, then we have the thromboxanes. Thromboxanes are produced by your platelets. When you get a cut, the platelets rush to the scene and release thromboxanes, which tells other platelets to get sticky and tells the blood vessels to constrict. They're the close the wound now signal.
And finally, the leukotrienes.
These are major players in the immune response and particularly in the lungs. They are potent bronchoconstrictors. They cause the tightening of the airways that you see in an asthma attack.
The pharmacology connection here is just huge. We have a class of drugs that billions of people take every day that targets this exact lipid pathway.
Aspirin and ibuprofen, naproxen, the NSAIDs, or nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. They work by blocking the key enzyme cyclooxygenase, or KOX, that liberated arachidonic acid into prostaglandins and thromboxanes.
So aspirin literally shuts down the lipid signaling factory.
It stops the whisper. It blocks the signal at the source. No prostaglandin signal, no pain, no fever. And it also reduces blood clotting by blocking thromboxanes, which is why so many heart patients take a low-dose baby aspirin every day. It's lipid biochemistry in a pill.
Incredible. Okay, we're in the final stretch here, section 7. We've talked about how amazing and versatile lipids are, but like anything powerful, they have a vulnerability, a critical weakness. We have to talk about when lipids go bad. Peroxidation.
This is the dark side of polyunsaturated fats. We love those double bonds for the fluidity they provide to our membranes. But chemically, a double bond is a point of weakness. It is electron-rich, and it is highly vulnerable to attack by oxygen, particularly by reactive oxygen species.
Is this the same process that happens when butter or oil goes rancid?
Exactly the same. That terrible smell of rancid fat is the smell of the breakdown products of lipid peroxidation. An oxygen-free radical attacks the double bond, steals an electron, and creates a lipid-free radical.
And a free radical is a molecule with an unpaired electron. It's chemically unstable and desperate to steal an electron from somewhere else to become stable again.
And it will steal that electron from its nearest neighbor, which is usually another fatty acid in the membrane. And Harper describes this as a chain reaction.
That's the really scary part. It's not a one-to-one damage event.
No, not at all. One initial free radical hits a fatty acid. That fatty acid becomes stable, but in the process, it turns the next fatty acid into a radical, which then attacks the next one, and the next one, and the next. It's a devastating domino effect.
Yeah.
One initial spark can burn down a huge patch of the membrane.
And in the body, this means massive tissue damage. It's implicated in cancer, in atherosclerosis, in the aging process. If the membrane is the skin of the cell, peroxidation is like a chemical burn spreading uncontrollably across it.
It completely destroys the integrity of the barrier. The cell becomes leaky. It can't maintain its gradients. it dies.
So how do we stop it? Our bodies aren't just helpless. We have a defense squad, the antioxidants.
Nature is not defenseless. We have a whole system. We have enzymes like superoxide dismutase and peroxidases that act as prevented antioxidants, trying to neutralize the free radicals before they can ever start the fire.
Yeah.
But once that chain reaction begins inside the oily membrane, we need a chain breaker.
Enter vitamin E.
Vitamin E, or tocopherol. It is a lipid-soluble vitamin. That is its key feature. It means it can live and swim inside the membrane itself. It's hydrophobic. It patrols the bilayer. When it encounters a lipid radical, one of those dominoes that's about to fall, it steps in and says, "Here, take my electron instead."
It's a suicide squad. It sacrifices itself to save the membrane.
It does. It becomes a radical itself. But it's a very stable, unreactive radical that doesn't attack anyone else. It stops the dominoes from falling. It breaks the chain.
But then you have a used-up, oxidized vitamin E molecule.
And this is where the system gets really elegant. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid, which is water-soluble and floats around just outside the membrane, comes along to the surface and recharges the vitamin E. It donates an electron back to the vitamin E molecule so it can go back into the membrane and get back to work.
It's a tag-team effort between the water-soluble antioxidant and the lipid-soluble one.
A beautiful cooperative system designed to protect the integrity of that crucial lipid barrier.
So let's try and synthesize this entire deep dive. We started with this really simple, almost derogatory idea that fat is just grease.
And I think what we found is that lipids are the silent architects of biology. They are the reserves, the triacylglycerols that allow us to carry a dense, dry, efficient energy bank.
Right.
They are the barriers, the amphipathic phospholipids and cholesterol that spontaneously self-assemble into the walls that literally define self versus the world.
And they're signals.
And they are the signals, the silent whispers of the eicosanoids that regulate pain and immunity, and the molecular ID cards of the glycolipids that manage identity and recognition.
It completely changes how I look at a cell. I used to see a bag of water with some proteins floating in it. Now I see this intricate, oily architecture, a structured but fluid crystal that is the scaffold upon which life is built.
And that leads to a final provocative thought for you, for everyone listening. We spend so much time and money studying the genome, our DNA, and the proteome, our proteins. We're always looking for genetic mutations to explain complex diseases.
Of course, that's where the cutting edge of medicine is, or seems to be.
But proteins don't exist in a vacuum. They live inside membranes. They are embedded in that lipid bilayer. If you change your diet, if you consume a lot of trans fats, or if your diet is woefully deficient in omega-3s, you're actively changing the physical viscosity and the chemical composition of that membrane. You're changing the room that all your proteins have to work in.
So a protein could be genetically perfect, but if the wall it's sitting in is too stiff or too leaky because of the wrong kinds of fats, the protein can't fold correctly or can't do its job properly.
Exactly. The protein itself might be fine, but the environment it lives in is broken. So I'll just leave you with this question. Could the solution to some of our most complex metabolic diseases lie not in trying to fix the proteins, but in simply fixing the oily walls that surround them?
Treat the oil, not just the engine. That is a lot to chew on. For those listening who really want to see the kinks and the rings and the coat racks we talked about today, I highly, highly recommend opening Leninger Chapter 10 or Harper Chapter 21. Seeing the diagrams really makes the geometry click into place.
It's absolutely worth the look. The pictures tell the story.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.